the chicken on the menu, please, sir, for today?
This is a random little amp that I've been building as a dealer for some other project, and it was never intended to have a video made about it. But when we got this far with it and we tested it, we found out that it sounds like this. Because it sounds like that, we decided that we would actually make an amp out of it. You see here it says Middleby Marshall. This is the housing from a conveyor motor controller out of a Middleby Marshall pizza oven, like the kind that they use at Pizza Hut. And we got a 12AX7 and a 12FX5 tube on the back of it. The same tubes used in the Teeny Tube Blaster. Except that the Teeny Tube Blaster kind of sucks because it has massively oversized grid stop resistors and a solid core output transformer, so it's a mid-range bandpass filter. This has no grid stop resistors, except that one, which I added at the last second and saw no difference after installing. As a result of not having 470,000 ohm grid stops on every stage, this amp actually sounds pretty good. So I built this box to put it in. Another 3/4 inch plywood box with JB Weld all over it. 1.5 cheek sanding job done on it, so now it's mostly smooth. It perfectly fits around this little Middleby Marshall chassis. And this little 4-inch speaker that came out of a radio. It actually fits too well. That's going to be a problem when we wrap the box, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. This little contraption that you saw hooked up to it earlier is a variable filament power supply that I made for testing random filament voltage tubes. So we're using it to put out the 12 volts AC that this amp chassis runs on. Comes in on these little wires here, through the power switch, and then to the two tubes, filaments, and then up to the power transformer, which is a wall wart transformer with its prongs sawed off here. You can clearly see that's what it used to be. And right where the prongs used to be that would plug into the wall, 120 volts or so AC comes out into a full bridge rectifier and then into your average power supply for a tube amp. There's really nothing spectacular about the amp circuits in here except that it has really pleasant sounding harmonic distortion. The speaker's not in the best shape ever. Look, I got a little super glue right there on a little tear. There's a little drop of super glue there, and yeah, it's really delicate. It doesn't sound too bad though, so we're gonna roll on. I got some screws countersunk here into the speaker buffet, and they're like painted over, and yeah, we're ready to go with that. If it's going to be called the Middleby Marshall, it seems right and fair to have a Marshall looking faceplate. So I've got this piece of brass cut out here with one extra hole because we've decided that it needs a tone control. See, that looks way more Marshall-y. And with this fancy pot, I can have it to where if you pull the tone control out, it bypasses the tone control. So we don't sacrifice the sound it originally had by giving it a tone control. I'll be using the Tweed single knob tone control like the one used in the Princeton 5F2A, which has 10 times more capacitance in the first stage coupling cap than I've used here. But changing it would change the original sound. We're gonna just not do that and roll with the 2.2 nanofarads that we have now and see how it goes. You know, after messing around for a little while, we have finally discovered the difference that this grid stop made. It makes Sibilance more tolerable. It's about the Sibilance. Well, about that chassis being too wide for the box thing. See, it won't fit. So, it looks like we finally made it to that bridge. Well, here's the solution. The box is 1/16 of an inch wider on the bottom than the top. So we'll just flip it upside down. Then everything fits perfectly. And that's the Middleby Marshall mini tube amp. The chassis is held in Frankenstein style, one screw in each ear. The tone control is bypassed by pulling out the tone control. The chassis would run nice and cool if we would just run it upside down, but we don't want to, so it runs like this. Changed the 12AX7 and the microphonic oscillation went away. And that's the story of the Middleby Marshall mini tube amp that has nothing to do with Marshall amps, that lends its name to the Middleby Marshall motor controller used to make the chassis. This is the schematic for the amp. This is the bias information about the output tube. This is the preamp pedal we were using for half of the audio demonstration. You can tell when it's hooked up because of this cord. This is a transformer. How about some closing statements, since we didn't have like a music montage or rant for 5 minutes about the data sheet or the output transformer and things like that. So what's special about this? Well, it runs on one of these, which is a good and a bad thing because, you know, this can't key you. So that's a positive, but you know, not everybody wants a box plug, and you sort of can't store the plug inside the amp, which is a bit inconvenient. But it doesn't run too hot, even when it's upright like this. The chassis stays cool enough that it's not going to melt itself. That little bitty 4-inch speaker that may or may not have an Alnico magnet on it sounds just fine with that little tear that we super glued. I couldn't be happier with the way this Tolex turned out. Look at that, man. I used the guide that Uncle Doug made when he wrapped that homemade Fender Champ that he made as a guide to make this, and this is how it turned out. So if you want to make a leather box that looks like this, hit up Uncle Doug. Well, that's all I could think of to say.